It is given to few men in their lifetimes to see this sight. This is the moon moving into perfect alignment between sun and earth. It's the most awe-inspiring sight the heavens can offer, the beginning of a total eclipse of the sun. This is the way today's eclipse looked to people in the remote mountainous state of Oaxaca in Mexico 30 minutes ago. And now the shadow of the moon is sweeping silently across the Gulf of Mexico toward Florida and a rendezvous with waiting millions on the east coast of the United States. The sound you hear, that is the music of the universe, played by the sun upon an instrument, the planet Earth. It's geomagnetic music, a computer readout of the sun's magnetic disturbance in the Earth's atmosphere, a fitting accompaniment to the solar eclipse of the century, the Earth in the shadow of the moon.
This is a CBS News special report. Earth in the shadow of the moon. The solar eclipse.
The moon does not orbit the Earth in the same plane that the Earth orbits the sun. If it did, the moon's shadow would pass across the Earth every month. Instead, the moon's orbit is tilted a little bit. So when the high side of the orbit is toward the sun, the moon's shadow passes above the Earth. Later in the year, when the Earth has revolved to a position on the other side of the sun, the low side of the moon's orbit is toward the sun, and the moon's shadow passes below the Earth. But when the Earth is midway between those two positions, the orbit of the moon can bring it into line between the sun and the Earth, and the result is what we're going to see today, the shadow of the moon passing across the Earth. The shadow of the moon has been approaching the Earth for several hours this morning. Right now it is racing toward us in the eastern United States at a speed of about 1,500 miles an hour. The center of the moon is slightly above the center of the Earth, so that's why the shadow is sweeping across the northern part of the globe today. And as it happens, the continent of North America is toward the sun, so that's why we'll see the eclipse instead of the Chinese. The moon is climbing in its orbit, so its shadow is climbing toward the northeast across the Earth. It will touch Florida in about 15 minutes now, and then follow up the southeast coast, out to sea north of Virginia, touching land again at Nova Scotia. The path of the total shadow is only about 100 miles wide, but a partial eclipse will be visible for about 2,000 miles on each side of the path. But it is the total eclipse that is so phenomenal. The process has already begun in the skies over the United States. The moon is moving slowly between us and the sun. At first, there appears to be just a small bite out of one side of the sun. Then the bite gets larger and larger. The sky begins to dim. You begin to know why this moment was so terrifying to early men. Now the moment approaches when only the blinding crescent edge of the sun is visible. Then the sun shines only between the craters and mountains of the moon. Then the cosmic vision of a lifetime, a total eclipse of the sun. Only the outer atmosphere of the sun is visible now, the incredible corona flashing out into the heavens. Astronomers who have experienced this moment of total eclipse speak of it in awe. Today, millions of Americans will have a chance to see it for themselves. Then, after 3 minutes or so, the cosmic sequence reverses itself. The sun flashes back into our sight. The total eclipse is over. Most of us will never see one again. Good day from CBS News in New York. I'm Charles Kuralt, and around here we are frankly excited at the prospect of what is to follow in the next hour. We have cameras all along the path of the total eclipse of the sun. In Mexico, which has already seen the eclipse, we'll be returning there for the reactions of the scientists. We have cameras and correspondents in Valdosta, Georgia, in an aircraft high above the weather over Georgia, in New York and Boston, in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And just at this point, I probably ought to say something you've heard before. This broadcast may be the best place to see the eclipse. It will certainly be the safest. Our cameras, which are going to be pointing at the sun, have filters on them that reduce the light of the sun by as much as 10 million times. You can imagine what that kind of light could do to your naked eye, or to your eye even protected by smoked glass or dark glasses. It's not much protection. A viewfinder of a camera is the very worst thing. The infrared comes right through and burns your retina without your even knowing it. You might fold several layers of fully exposed black and white negatives, glance at the sun for just a few seconds, but no longer than that. All right, we'll be back to cover this story of night falling across America at midday in a moment. The total eclipse of the sun is now about 9 minutes away from the coast of Florida. It's going to follow that path you see, which will permit us to see it in Georgia, if not from the ground at Valdosta, where the clouds are pretty bad, then from an Air Force NKC-135 above the clouds. Then, sort of following Interstate 95, the path of the eclipse will flash across the coastal plain of the Carolinas, out to sea, brush Nantucket Island onto Nova Scotia, where we'll see it again. And when we do see it, what shall we be looking for? Up until now, I have been masquerading as an astronomer, which I am not. This man is. He is Dr. Kenneth Franklin, the assistant chairman of the American Museum Hayden Planetarium in New York. Dr. Franklin, what shall we look for? And all those scientists who have gathered from all over the world, what will they be looking for?
Well, you can well imagine that scientists all over the world, especially astronomers, are having a field day today.
Yes.
There are those who are interested in timing those special occurrences, which we call contacts, to find out whether or not the moon is on schedule and whether the Earth is turning properly, according to their theories, and if not, to correct these. Others, astrophysicists, are going to be examining the sun itself for some of the rare things that they can see only at the time of a total eclipse, namely the great outer extensions of this tenuous atmosphere called the corona. And then Earth scientists are going to study our atmosphere. The high electrified layers above the Earth, called the ionosphere, will have a drastic shock as that shadow comes along and turns off its source of energy, the sun. Our scientists are going to try and find out what happens to that with rockets running up from Wallops Island. And then there are meteorologists who are going to find out what happens to the local situation as this cooling comes along, allows the air to contract and pull in wind from all around that great shadow 100 miles across.
You've seen an eclipse yourself, have you?
I have, sir, yes.
In human terms, is it impressive?
In human terms, it is fantastic. You can understand why those people beat on the drums to chase that dragon away.
Well, there are maybe some disappointed humans today. The weather, as we have suggested before, is not ideal along the entire path of the eclipse. We're going to go now to our chief meteorologist, Gordon Barnes, to fill us in on just what people will see and maybe what they won't see. Gordon?
Charlie, it's one of those unpredictable situations in the Gulf of Mexico. We have been watching very closely a storm system that has been developing and intensifying down there for the past couple of days. Of course, the pictures that we saw from Mexico were very clear, but on the eastern coast of Mexico and all of Central America, there is quite a bit of cloudiness. The cloudiness has now spread northward into Florida and southern Georgia. In fact, from the vicinity of Venice, Florida, through Sarasota, St. Petersburg, northward to the Panhandle region around Perry and Apalachicola, they will have some rather severe thunderstorms this afternoon, accompanied by heavy rain, possibility of some damaging winds, so be on the alert for them. But once you get north of the Georgia-South Carolina border, from there through the Carolinas, Norfolk, Virginia, it's going to be perfect. Skies right now are just clear there. They're going to remain that way. Here in the vicinity of New York City, we have some high, thin clouds around. It remains clear through Nantucket, Boston, Massachusetts, and all the way up to Halifax, Nova Scotia. So all in all, from South Carolina to the north, it'll be clear, and we'll have a good chance to see it. Charlie?
In about 5 minutes, the shadow of the moon touches the coast of the United States. As I've said, we have our correspondents stationed along the path of total darkness, where the moon's shadow will move like a giant crayon mark. We're going to find out what's happening within that corridor now. We're going to start at a place where the eclipse has already been seen, to David Shoemaker in Nejapa, state of Oaxaca, Mexico.
If you're not fussy about the accommodations, there may be no more fitting place in the world to view an eclipse than here in the remote mountains of southern Mexico. Nearby, the ruins of ancient civilizations, the Zapotecs and the Mixtecs, to whom an eclipse was a frightening occurrence. So the few Indians who live here now being descendants of those people, the government and the church have spent the past week trying to reassure the peasants. Near us, the French site. They have the most elaborate setup near here, and just beyond them, the University of South Florida. And then an amateur astronomer from Los Angeles and his wife who came down in a camper. She's been doing the wash in a stream with the native women. When we first arrived, there were plenty of animals around to test that theory about how they should react to an eclipse. However, they all disappeared, so we had to turn to Hertz Rent-A-Rooster for our test subject. He's been named Gordon for some reason, and during the eclipse, Gordon, who had been crowing all morning, suddenly was quiet and just shuffled about rather nervously. This is David Shoemaker, CBS News at Nejapa, Oaxaca, Mexico. Now to Nelson Benton in Valdosta, Georgia.
The Palm Line campus of Valdosta State College is one of the spots picked by serious observers of the eclipse to study those magic couple of minutes or so when the eclipse is total. And situated on the campus here are some of the 600 or so people who have journeyed here for that particular event. Their equipment is almost as varied as their number. However, it is a little bit like the band showing up for the halftime ceremony and the teams didn't get here. It is clouded over in Valdosta, and if you look very closely, you may be able to find where the sun is. Nevertheless, the state of Georgia has published warning signs visible to travelers and to residents alike, warning about those dangers of looking directly at the sun. And for the benefit of those who may be in a path that does have the sun showing, Dr. Harry Berline, who is on the faculty here at Valdosta State, can tell us the simplest and safest way of watching the eclipse. Doctor?
You take 2 sheets of white cardboard, you make a small pinhole in the first sheet, hold it at shoulder height, turn your back towards the sun, and project an image of the sun on the second sheet, which serves as a screen.
So if you had the sun, you'd get a mini image of
I
the
would
eclipse.
get a very mini image indeed.
And a safe one.
But very safe.
Thank you very much, Doctor.
You're welcome.
There are many exotic experiments here and around Valdosta. CBS News also has a rooster in Valdosta. It's a brown 7-year-old rooster that belongs to 9-year-old Barry Carter. And we're going to see whether he roosts, whether he crows, or whether he flies the coop. As it turns out, with no sun, it may be the only experiment that works. Now, let's go to George Herman, somewhere over the skies of Georgia on an Air Force plane.
Thank you, Nelson. We hope this one works, too. This is Air Force 376. It's a C-135. Its main job ordinarily is to photograph missile tracks. Today we've taken out the bank of cameras and we've put in this giant telescope built by CBS Laboratories. Perhaps you can see in back of me Dr. Bill Glenn, who built it for CBS. With this telescope, we hope to be able to see the eclipse of the sun. We've already been able to see a little piece of it, the sun's shadow sweeping across. We're at 40,000 feet here, so we're above about 80% of the atmosphere. We hope to be able to see the Bailey speed, the diamond ring effect, if there is one, if the clear air turbulence, which is currently disturbing us, holds off. The signal from here is relayed down to the ground by Caltech microwave and picked up in Savannah, Georgia, and we hope it works all right. If all goes very well, we'll have one additional effect, never seen before, the Earth-lit moon. We hope that the moon will show the reflected light of the Earth, and we'll be able to pick out some of the craters. Never been done before, but with a special filter, we hope to be able to do it. Continuing our roundup of the CBS correspondents, let's go now to CBS News correspondent Bill Clapp in Halifax.
Halifax, Nova Scotia is the last major population center along the path of totality. With its magnificent deep-water port and magnificent natural harbor, this for years was the principal military bastion of British Canada. And these, too, are the shores of Acadia, from which Longfellow's French lovers are banished by the British and evangelized. Kipling, who, as you may recall, had a way with pompous phrases, called Halifax the Warden of the Honor of the North. The sea favors Halifax's climate, the sun less often so. It is overcast here something over 60% of the time. The cloud cover this afternoon is high. It is just possible that we may get a break. However, it may turn out to be the most frustrating eclipse watch of all, because just to the east of us, perhaps not more than 100 miles, the skies look as though there is a large, clear hole. We have no rooster here in Halifax, but we have some seagulls who are alighting on our vantage point from time to time. We will watch them and report to you. In any case, we're certain to feel the attendant phenomenon, the temperature drop, and, of course, the darkening of the sky into twilight here at midday. It is to be an impressive sight, we feel, even without the clear skies. This is Bill Plant in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Now back to Charles Kuralt in New York.
The small spot of speeding darkness is just now touching the coast of the United States. In about a minute, it will be over Valdosta, Georgia, and in about a minute, we'll go back to Nelson Benton. The total eclipse is now commencing in Valdosta, Georgia. We hope that all those amateur astronomers and professional astronomers and ordinary people of Valdosta don't have too great a disappointment to swallow. Let's switch back there now immediately to Nelson Benton.
Charlie, what we're seeing right now is what you're seeing. There is just nothing here. It has gotten dark, and I must say that this is quite an experience because just moments ago we had reading light. We had enough light to discern figures quite clearly, and it was almost as though a giant rheostat just dimmed the sun. And of course, we are dealing now with no lights whatsoever except some lights in the college, some 30 or 40 feet from our cameras. We're all prepared, of course, to show you totality as it appeared from the ground. Well, this is how it appears, because there is about a 12,000-foot rather thick cloud layer between this part of the Earth and the Moon and the Sun, and we know where the Sun is, but and our cameras are looking up at the Sun right now, but as you see, there is no image of the Sun. You can see just a faint pink light on the base of the clouds, but I think if I had to pick out the exact position of the Sun right now, I would need one of those preset telescopes that these amateurs set up before the eclipse started taking place.
Nelson, I never thought I would find a dark screen an eerie sight, but somehow it is.
Well, Charlie, you got to be here to believe it. It's eerie when that darkness is four-dimensional. And now, if you will notice, we're hearing applause from the crowd in the background as we're finding out that the world is not coming to an end, that the eclipse is ending, and light is very rapidly returning to Valdosta in the path of totality. We did not see the sun, but we did see the effect, and believe me, the rock and roll band that was performing some distance away silenced itself, and the lights just went off, and now, just almost like curtain time on Broadway, the house lights are rather at the end of the curtain, at the final curtain, the lights are coming up, and just coming up so rapidly that you can indeed observe. It's just an eerie phenomenon, Charlie.
Dr. Franklin, are those scientists down at Valdosta going to be able to learn anything, or is this just a total washout because of the clouds?
Well, there's certainly not a personal washout. You can watch that shadow come swooping up out of the southwest and across you there. But the people who are contemplating doing radio work can do it, and those who have just ordinary light meters for cameras would be able to record the darkening, the change in light, and enjoy it in that regard. But I think those who expected to go out and look at that beautiful corona are certainly grossly disappointed, but we hope that they can make it to another site some other time.
Nelson, it looks as though daylight has almost returned to you
now. Yes, it has, Charles. I was looking for a photographer with an exposure meter to see if his exposure meter looks like a thermometer going up. The daylight has returned very rapidly, and we have clear definition, and now we look again to see somewhere above that dome, just where the sun is, and it seems that our cloud cover has gotten even thicker during the period of darkness.
And what about the rooster? I thought I heard a chicken clucking.
We've got to find young Barry Carter. Barry, come over here and what did your brownie rooster do during the eclipse? Did he crow? Did he roost? Or what did he do?
Well, there was too much noise going on. He just didn't want to go to roost. There was too much noise going on, so they didn't go to roost. They just sat down and scratched, just like all of them.
Well, thank you very much, Barry. Well, that's the way it is, Charlie. The best laid plans of the scientists and even us curious just don't work all the time. Brownie stayed awake the whole time.
Roosters may go to roost in barnyards, but not when surrounded by hundreds of people. Dr. Franklin, we're going to go very shortly now to that airplane that's racing the moon's shadow. What are we going to see? I suppose this might be the best view of all.
Well, I certainly hope it'll be the best view of all, because there's a very special filter aboard that will cut down the intense bright corona near the edge of the sun, bring it down to about the level of the corona as it spreads way out away from the sun, so it ought to be just about even illumination. And as they said aboard the plane, there's a hole in that filter which is perfectly clear and should allow us a very great first in science to see the Earth shine at the middle.
Something nobody's ever seen before.
I've not seen it before.
All right, let's go now to that Air Force NKC-135 at 40,000 feet over Georgia, where pool correspondents George Herman and Jules Bergman will report to us.
Right at about 2 o'clock. It's very hard for us to pan in on it, but you can see a sort of a hedgerow, a little bristle on the upper right at about 2 o'clock on your screen.
And that prominence is a burst of hydrogen gas exploding at a temperature of about 2 million degrees Fahrenheit.
And beyond that, you can see now, perhaps we can pull back just a little bit. If we can pull back just a little bit with the camera, you can see the corona stretching out. This is being gathered through the telescope which is built here by the CBS laboratories and pointed out this window through a mirror. There, we've lost the image from that. It's rather difficult because we have to aim it through a mirror, which is handheld.
And the sun is already emerging from behind the limb. I've got a view right out of the porthole of our wind plane here, George. The sun's already emerging slightly from behind the moon's limb. Totality about to end, and we're going to see all these events in reverse now.
Yes.
I couldn't see Bailey's bead take place, the brilliant bursts of sunlight or photosphere light reflected off the valleys of the moon. We may see it now as it happens in reverse.
No, I'm afraid not, Jules. What we're getting is an arch of the chromosphere, that pinkish red glow around the photosphere, the brilliant part of the sun. And there's not a chance for Bailey's beads, the sun shining through the valleys. It's too late for us here. Either it didn't show because of the profile of the moon or because we were unable to get it with our complicated arrangements of mirrors as we flew past. And that's 41 or 42,000 feet above Savannah here, above most of the Earth's atmosphere, but we still have a problem.
And it's turning to daylight here. Sunlight's beginning to glint off our wings, to reflect off the clouds, which are still kind of a mauve or a mouse gray.
And now, Jules, in the extreme distance, you see that black line. That was the Earth's shadow. Can we have the clouds again for just a second?
Let's go back to the clouds.
You see the black line at the top of the gray of the clouds. That is the receding Earth's shadow moving off at about 1,900 miles an hour.
And that, of course, is the trailing edge of our wing in the left-hand side of the picture. We can go forward, maybe we can show part of the wing and the light beginning to come back on it.
Yeah, it's moved off very fast.
There we go.
The shadow just receding.
That wing was black and invisible about a minute ago. And it's turning daylight again. Darkness at midday, darkness at noon, as it were, beginning to end.
And there is the limb of the sun beginning to appear now, more than just the chromosphere. I think that's beginning to be the part of the photosphere. Unhappily, we were unable to see in that brief second with our television resolution, we were unable to see the features that the astronomers would have been looking for.
Right, but they seem to have had good sunlight without too much clouds in Mexico. The thousands of experimenters gathered down there may have seen Bailey's beads, may have seen the chromosphere better than we did.
What we did have was a spectacular corona for this period about 2 years after the peak of sunspot. Going out, let me see, the radius of the moon is about 400,000 miles. We saw it about 3 radiuses at least.
Right.
So that's over almost 1.5 million miles. We were able to see
It looked like all the astronomy and science textbooks I've ever read, and several times better. The pictures were several times better. We hope they were as good down below. And there's more of the sun now emerging from behind the moon's shadow.
And there you see that the shadow of the Earth, the umbra, the dark shadow of the Earth, has receded almost entirely beyond our horizon, and we have only the penumbra, sort of dirty gray light on the clouds, almost like a very early and rather grim-looking dawn.
We might explain again, you're seeing this picture live from an airborne flying observatory, an Air Force KC-135 jet, the Air Force version of the 707 jet through a special telescope rigged up by CBS Laboratories and live pool television cameras.
And just for the geography, we are approximately over Savannah.
Well, I, for one, would like nothing better than to take another look at the best view of the eclipse we've seen so far, and that was really the one from Oaxaca, Mexico. Dr. Franklin and I are going to look at it again and give you a chance to see it again after this message. The shadow of the moon is about even with Fayetteville, North Carolina just now, but what we are seeing is a view recorded about an hour ago as the shadow reached the state of Oaxaca in Mexico. Dr. Franklin, a partial eclipse, the thing we're seeing right now, is fairly impressive, but nothing at all compared to the total eclipse.
No, this is quite so. It's impressive enough, all right, because there's that big bite taken out of the sun. But I don't care how partial or how near totality, if it's not total, you don't get to see that corona. You don't get to see that red chromosphere that's just over the surface.
Just because the sun, even a little bit of the sun, is too bright.
Much too bright. The whole sun is about 400,000 times brighter than the full moon. And so if you take just one fragment about 100,000 miles across on the face of the sun, it dazzles you. And that kills any of the contrast you might like to see. It's an impressive sight anyway, though. And even the partial eclipse is good for astronomers who are interested in timing these events, as I said a little while ago, to check up on the dynamics of the Earth and Moon and Sun system.
Of course, a partial eclipse is what most Americans are seeing today, if they...
That's correct. And we will see partial eclipses several times more during this century, but in 1972, for instance. So anybody who has been successful in watching the partial eclipse today, save all of your good things so that you can use them again in a couple of years.
I don't think anybody can save anything for 2 years anymore. All right. Well, in a minute or so, I think we're going to have a chance to take a look at the total eclipse. The best view of it we've had anyway, was from Mexico. I suppose the scientists on the plane might have had a successful 3 minutes.
Well, I think if all goes well, we'll have a chance to speak to some of them and see what their impressions were as eyeballing it, if they had time enough to do it from taking care of their equipment. You know, these things are so impressive, even to scientists who understand them and know all about them, that occasionally at the moment they forget to pull the lens cover off, they forget to do anything, and they just stand there and look at this awe-inspiring sight. This has happened.
Did you know what to expect when you saw your first eclipse?
No. You read about these things, yet you still don't know exactly what. And in 1963, I saw one, and I wasn't prepared for what I had to see. It was just remarkable. It was just fantastic. How can you describe these things? Now, there are several people along the path that are going to see it still today, but the people in Valdosta and in Georgia in general shouldn't be too disappointed, because even about 60% of the professional expeditions that go out are washed out by weather.
We're about 10 minutes before the maximum eclipse here in New York. This is what New Yorkers are seeing just now.
That little slimmer crescent that you see there will narrow quite a little bit, and it will move across the top of the sun very rapidly as the shadow passes about 100 miles from us out in sea and going at about 2,000 miles an hour toward Halifax.
Of course, we're inside. Are the streets of New York darkened, and the streets of Boston, say, by that much of an eclipse?
It will look like a hazy, overcast day. And unless people look up at the sun, they might think that it's just a little bit disturbed weather-wise.
That picture is being taken from the roof of the Boston Garden.
Well, you can see that they're not as far advanced as New York, and they're farther up the shadow path.
Now, as this shadow moves northeast, it has the effect of accelerating, doesn't it? It's moving faster now than it was, say, an hour ago.
Well, it's moving faster over the ground because the ground is sloping away from the sunlight. You know how your shadow extends very rapidly as the sun goes down in the west. This effect is going on now, and there will be an acceleration across the ground of this shadow, the footprint, if you will, of the shadow of the moon. It extends out into a long elliptical path, and this path will extend more and more and more as it goes up into the northeast of here.
You can see that the clouds which disappointed people in the southeastern United States have not extended this far northeast. just seeing this with a television camera.
Last time I was outside, it was a little hazy, though.
Well, these partial eclipses are fascinating, but the real thing, the thing that has made this day so exciting, is the total eclipse. And we're going to have a chance now to go to the videotape of the, well, we are very shortly going to have a chance to go to the videotape of the total eclipse in Mexico. While we're waiting for that, it might be kind of interesting to see what the people who saw that eclipse thought about it, Dr. Franklin. So let's go back down to Najapa in Mexico, where David Shoemaker is standing by.
About 500 scientists from around the world have concentrated in these mountains, along with a scattering of tourists and just a few journalists. The problems in setting up down here have been enormous. For instance, we did finally manage to get a telephone line over that hill over there. Our number is numero uno if you'd like to call us, by the way, and we wish you would. Since every time we try to call out, the operator in Mexico City tells us it's impossible. There are no phones down here where we are. The French have the most elaborate setup, including wine and air conditioning. Down the road, the three-man Swiss outfit sneers at the French for overdoing things just a bit. But the scientists are having a wonderful time and are cooperating with each other. Two of those scientists are here today with us, Dr. Lafeneur of the French expedition and Dr. William Prothero of Ohio State University. Now, yesterday, Dr. Lafeneur, you told me that there were two kinds of eclipses. Some are like Brigitte Bardot and others are like Gina Lollobrigida. Which kind was this?
I think it's a Brigitte Bardot eclipse.
What kind of an eclipse is that? Good or bad?
It was a good eclipse. Good eclipse. Fairly clear sky. And I think it's a maximum activity eclipse. More as a maximum activity eclipse than the previous Siberian one I observed in Yurgamish.
Well, is this the best eclipse you think you've ever seen?
Nearly, not exactly. The best was in Khartoum years ago, in 52.
Well, will you be talking about this eclipse for years now? Was it at least that good?
Oh, I shall talk about that, but I shall work on it. I hope my records are good.
How did your experiments go, do you think?
I think they went perfectly well.
Dr. Prothero, you seem to be having a little trouble over there.
Yes, we did, unfortunately. We had two experiments going. One experiment broke down on us. The tape recorder, which was to store the data, went kaput just before the stage of totality. The other experiment, we had little excitement, but I think we saved it. The fuse popped out of the movie camera, so one of my assistants held the fuse in while we finished off the second phase of the eclipse.
Well, what did you think of the eclipse, or were you too busy sweating this one out?
Well, fortunately, our experiment is concerned only with the very beginning, the first 4 seconds, and the last 4 seconds of totality. So we had a good chance to view the phase of totality. I thought it was particularly striking. Very long streamers, some good prominences visible, and certainly one of the most magnificent diamond ring effects. The Bailey's bead at the very end of the eclipse blowing out into a beautiful diamond with the ring of the corona around it. In all, very striking.
Say, Bill, is this a science or is this a camping club?
Sometimes one wonders. I'm not sure it's a science. It's probably an art, and it takes about 90% luck on the day of the eclipse for the weather. We had that today, and the tremendous amount of work both before getting the equipment ready and much work afterwards getting the data reduced.
Dr. Prothero, Dr. Lafeneur, thank you very much. This is not, as you can tell, a laboratory science exactly. David Shoemaker, CBS News, Najapa, Oaxaca, Mexico.
The prize for the most debonair line of the afternoon will certainly be, well, it was a good eclipse, but not quite as good as the one in Khartoum. We'll go on with this in a moment. How swift, how silently the shadow of the night comes on. If Mr. Archibald MacLeish should be in our audience, he would recognize those lines as his own, and never more appropriate than on this day when the shadow of the moon is racing up the east coast of the United States. It's approaching New York now, and we will see what New Yorkers are seeing in a minute or two. First, we want to check back just once with Nelson Benton in Valdosta, Georgia. Nelson, has the disappointment sunk in?
Charles, Dr. Ray Hunter, who's head of the physics department here, is perhaps the man in charge of disappointment. How disappointed are you, sir?
Well, pretty much so. It's obvious I need some more experience in staging an eclipse.
Well, did you learn something from it, though, Doctor?
Well, it's a little early to tell, but I doubt very much. Maybe something from the radio astronomy stuff.
But other than that, it was just the eerie effect, which it didn't take any particular expertise to appreciate.
That's right.
Well, Charles, one of Dr. Hunter's associates, whom you met earlier, Dr. Berline, had a Buddhist mother, and he is given to Buddhist expressions. And earlier in the day when we saw the sun, he said, perhaps Allah is not asleep after all. Allah was asleep so far as Valdosta is concerned, Charles.
Too bad, too bad. Well, I suppose we can take another look at the camera that's above our heads just now. That's what New York is seeing right now, Dr. Franklin.
Well, it's very slim, just like I said it would be. This is one of the nice things about these eclipses. You can predict them very well.
You can predict them, sir.
Well, colleagues of mine. But this is one of the reasons why we do want to time these eclipses, so that we can improve predictions as the future goes, and so we can understand more about the motion of the moon. It's an extremely complicated problem, and eclipses, wherever they occur, are of great importance in trying to work out these problems.
Even this much of an eclipse is exciting. Up with our cameraman on the roof, I'm told, is a dedicated 15-year-old astronomer who's hefted a great big telescope and a reflecting system up there to see this 96% totality in New York.
Well, I think he will have an experience that will probably keep him in this business for some time to come. It's probably true around the country, too. Donald Menzel, who is down in Mexico, is sort of the dean of American astronomers observing eclipses, and he saw one in Colorado as a boy of 17 back in 1918. He's still at it.
I think we should tell our viewers that in another 10 minutes or so, we're going to have a chance to see another total eclipse of the sun at Halifax, Nova Scotia. What about the people who live down south and just missed this eclipse today? When's their next chance going to be, Dr. Franklin?
Depends on just where they live down south, but the next eclipse that will pass across this nation will come in somewhere, say, northern California, and go out along in the Carolinas in the year 2017.
That's a pretty long time to wait.
Well, unfortunately, that's the way of the world, and you've got to go visit these things. They don't come to you. You can stay in one place and expect maybe to get an eclipse pass over you in, say, 300 or 400 years on the average. So you see, this is an adventure. It is a camping society, as Bill Prothero was talking about down there in Mexico.
What's happened to the Boston eclipse? Surely it's not that total.
Not unless me and my colleagues are very badly out.
There's going to be a very good one in 2024, too, I'm told.
2024 will be a relative of this eclipse, and it will come up the coast inland this time. It will come up in Mexico and Texas and leave the United States by about western Maine. Yes, the year 2024 in April. In 1972, there's going to be a total eclipse pass across Canada, which will be viewed as a partial eclipse here in the United States. And in 1979, the United States itself will be involved in another total eclipse, a rather short one, however, which will enter about Washington State and sweep up north, passing Hudson's Bay.
The eclipse that New Yorkers are seeing, a partial one, is, of course, total to ships at sea off, say, George's Bank. It's going to be total to folks in Halifax, Nova Scotia, too, including our correspondent, Bill Plant, and we will very soon be going to him. We'll be back with more of our coverage of the total eclipse in a moment.
This is Halifax, Nova Scotia, and in the last 30 seconds, we have witnessed the most incredible sight. In spite of the fact that we cannot see the sun, it is as dark as night. The light has fallen so quickly, as was reported earlier from Valdosta, from an acceptable twilight or reading level or cloud cover level to virtual night. Cars have their lights on. The city street lights in Halifax are on. It's a lovely panorama. And just off to the north, And to the east, beneath this layer of dark, dark sky, there is a lovely pink and orange horizon, which obviously is the point that the umbra has not yet reached. It is just an incredible and fascinating sight. The sky is almost pitch black, but not quite. We've had a cloud cover here in Halifax. We have not been able, as we told you earlier, to see the sun. It's a little bit disappointing, the more so because of the hole which we had in the horizon to the west of us, about 100 miles. Looked as though it might be very promising in an hour or two, but of course that was too late. The horizon is a lovely orange and gold color. That's northeast and out to sea. Of course, from here, the eclipse will pass out to the northeast over Cape Breton and then to Newfoundland. The path of totality will just about graze Gander International Airport. And then sweeping at an ever-increasing speed, it'll go out into the North Atlantic, where perhaps some lucky passengers on a transatlantic airliner may have a chance to view the eclipse. No one knows. But the speed, of course, is increasing, something over 3,300 miles per hour as it sweeps past this point. It is, we say again, really an incredible phenomenon to have the sky go so suddenly dark. It could not have taken more than 30 seconds, and then to have this totality of eclipse. 100 miles north of here in East Quoddy, Nova Scotia, Canadian scientists are firing rockets to make some radio tests. The cloud cover will not disturb them. The phenomenon of the eclipse no longer ends wars, as it did once in ancient history at least, or, for that matter, it won't make us, like the Orinoco Indians, vow to lead better lives, but it nonetheless is still somehow, to us anyway, a matter of myth and poetry as much as of science. This is Bill Plant, CBS News in Halifax, Nova Scotia.
Well, Dr. Franklin, I guess the clouds defeated us along much of this path.
Well, that's normal for eclipse observations, I'm afraid. Mr. Plant was mentioning the colors. This is due to the fact that the last remaining light from the sun just before the moon cuts it off is red. And that's what he was seeing off to the side.
Well, now it is all over. The shadow of the moon is racing at about 3,000 miles an hour toward the edge of the Earth. The astronomers all confirm that the sun is riding high in the heavens. Soon the moon will have gone entirely on its way. Its encounter with the sun and us just a memory, but a rather magnificent memory. One last word to the disappointed people along the path who didn't see the eclipse. You will not, it is true, see another such eclipse in the American South unless you're very young and live to be rather old. But you might plan a vacation for 1973 for a place where the sun almost always shines. There's going to be a Dili in that year in the Sahara Desert. With Dr. Kenneth Franklin of the Hayden Planetarium, this is Charles Kuralt, CBS News, New York.